Chapter 21 Neural Control and Coordination. As you know, the function of the organ system in our body must be coordinated to maintain homeostasis. Coordination is the process through which two or more organs interact and complement the function of one another. For example, when we do physical exercise, the energy demand is increased for maintaining and increase muscular activity. The supply of oxygen is also increased. The increased supply of oxygen necessitates an increase in the rate of respiration, heartbeat, and increased blood flow via blood vessels. When physical exercise is stopped, the activities of nerves, lungs, hearts, and kidney gradually return to their normal condition. Thus, the function of muscle, lungs, heart, blood vessels, kidney, and other organs are coordinated while performing physical exercise. In our body, the neural system and the endocrine system jointly coordinate and integrate all the activities of the organ so that they function in a synchronized fashion. The neural system provides an organized network of point-to-point connection for a quick coordination. The endocrine system provides chemical integration through hormones. In this chapter, you will learn about the neural system of human, mechanism of neural coordination like transmission of nerve impulse conduction across a synapse, and a physiology of reflex action. 21.1 Neural System. The neural system of all animal is composed of highly specialized cells called neurons, which can detect, receive, and transmit different kinds of stimuli. The neural organization is very simple in lower invertebrates. For example, in Hydra, it is composed of a network of neurons. The neural system is better organized in insects, where a brain is present along with a number of ganglia and neural tissues. The vertebrates have a more developed neural system. 21.2 Human Neural System. The human neural system is divided into two parts. First, the central neural system (CNS). Second, the peripheral neural system (PNS). The CNS includes the brain and the spinal cord and is the site of information processing and control. The PNS comprises of all the nerves of the body associated with the CNS, brain, and spinal cord. The nerves fiber of the PNS are of two types. First, afferent fiber, B. efferent fiber. The afferent nerve fiber transmit impulse from tissue or organ to the sinus, and the efferent fiber transmit regulatory impulse from the CNS to the concerned peripheral tissue organs. The PNS is divided into two divisions called somatic neural system and autonomic neural system. The somatic neural system relays impulse from the CNS to skeletal muscle, while the autonomic neural system transmits impulse from the CNS to the involuntary organ and the smooth muscle of the body. The autonomic neural system is further classified into sympathetic neural system and parasympathetic neural system. Visceral nervous system is the part of the peripheral nervous system that comprises the whole complex of nerves, fibers, ganglia, and plexuses by which impulse travel from the central nervous system to the viscera and from the viscera to the central nervous system. 21.3 Neuron as structure and functional unit of neural system. A neuron is a microscopic structure composed of three major parts, namely cell body, dendrites, and axon. Figure 21.1. The cell body contains cytoplasm with typical cell organelle and certain granular bodies called Nissel's granules, short fiber which branch repeatedly and project out of the body, also contain Nissel granules and are called dendrites. These fibers transmit impulse towards the cell body. The axon is a long fiber, the distal end of which is branched. Each branch terminates as a bulb-like structure called synaptic knob, which process synaptic vesicle containing chemicals called neurotransmitter. The axon transmits nerve impulse away from the cell body to a synapse or to a neuromuscular junction based on the number of axon and dendrites. The neurons are divided into three types: multipolar with one axon and two or more dendrites found in the cerebral cortex; bipolar with one axon and one dendrite found in the retina of eye; and unipolar cell body with one axon only, found only in the embryonic stage. There are two types of axon, namely myelinated and non-myelinated. The myelinated nerve fiber are involved with Schwann cells which form a myelin sheath around the axon. The gaps between two adjacent myelin sheaths are called nodes of Ranvier. Myelinated nerve fiber are found in the spinal and cranial nerves. Unmyelinated nerve fiber is enclosed by the Schwann cell that does not form a myelin sheath around the axon and is commonly found in autonomous and the somatic nervous system. 21.3.1 Generation and conduction of nerve impulse. Neurons are excitable cells because their membranes are in a polarized state. Do you know why the membrane of a neuron is polarized? Different types of ions channels are present on the neural membrane. These ion channels are selectively permeable to different ions. When a neuron is not conducted any impulse resting the axonal membrane is comparatively more permeable to potassium ions and nearly impermeable to sodium ions. Similarly, the membrane is impermeable to negatively charged protein present in the exoplasm. Consequently, the exoplasm inside the axon contain high concentration of potassium and negatively charged protein and low concentration of sodium. In contrast, the fluid outside the axon contain a low concentration of potassium, a high concentration of sodium, and thus form a concentration gradient. These ionic gradient across the resting membrane are maintained by the active transport of ions by the sodium-potassium pump, which transport 3 sodium outwards for 2 potassium into the cell. As a result, the outer surface of the axonal membrane possesses a positive charge while in the inner surface becomes negatively charged and therefore is polarized. The electrical potential difference across the resting plasma membrane is called as resting potential. You might be curious to know about the mechanism of generation of nerve impulse and its conduction along an axon. When a stimulus is applied at a site, figure 21.2, example point A, on the polarized membrane, the membrane at the site A becomes freely permeable to sodium. This leads to a rapid influx of sodium followed by the reversal of the polarity at that site. The outer surface of the membrane becomes negatively charged and the inner side becomes positively charged. The polarity of the membrane at the site is thus reversed and hence polarized. The electrical potential difference across the plasma membrane at the site A is called the action potential, which is in fact termed as the nerve impulse. At the site immediately ahead, the axon, example site B, membrane has a positive charge on the outer surface and a negative charge on its inner surface. As a result, a current flows on the inner surface from site A to site B. On the outer surface, current flows from site B to site A, figure 21.2. To complete the circuit of current flow, hence the polarity of a site is reversed and an action potential is generated at site B. Thus, the impulse action potential generated at site A arrives at site B. The sequence is repeated along the length of the axon and consequently the impulse is conducted. Thus, rise in the stimulus induced permeability to sodium is extremely short-lived. It is quickly followed by a rise in permeability to potassium within a fraction of a second. Potassium diffuse outside the membrane and restore the resting potential of the membrane at the site of excitation and the fiber become once more responsive to further stimulation. 21.3.2 Transmission of impulse. A nerve impulse is transmitted from one neuron to another through junction called synapse. A synapse is formed by the membrane of a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron, which may or may not be separated by a gap called synaptic cleft. There are two types of synapse, namely electrical synapses and chemical synapses. At electrical synapse, the membranes of pre- and post-synaptic neurons are in the close proximity. The electrical current can flow directly from one neuron into the other across the synapse. Transmission of one impulse across electrical synapse is very the other across the synapse. Transmission of an impulse across electrical synapse is very similar to impulse conduction along with single axon. Impulse transmission across an electrical synapse is always faster than that across a chemical synapse. Electrical synapses are rare in our system. At a chemical synapse, the membrane of the pre and postsynaptic neuron are separated by a fluid-filled space called synaptic cleft. Figure 21.3. Do you know how the presynaptic neuron transmit on impulse action potential across the synaptic cleft to the postsynaptic neuron? Chemicals called neurotransmitters are involved in the transmission of impulse at these synapses. The axon terminals contain vesicles filled with these neurotransmitters. When an impulse action potential arrives at the axon terminal, it stimulates the movement of the synaptic vessel towards the membrane where they fuse with the plasma. Figure 21.3 diagram showing axon terminal and synapse membrane and release their neurotransmitter in the synaptic cleft. Then released neurotransmitter bind to their specific receptor present on the postsynaptic membrane. This bind opens ion channel, allowing the entry of ions which can generate a new potential in the postsynaptic neuron. The new potential develops may be either excitatory or inhibitory. 21.4 Central Neural System. The brain is the central information processing organ of our body and acts as a command and control system. It controls the voluntary movement, balance of the body, functioning of vital involuntary organs, example lung, heart, kidney, etc. Thermoregulatory, hunger and thirst, circadian 24 hours rhythm of our body, activities of several endocrine glands and human behavior. It is also the site of processing of vision, hearing, speech, memory, intelligence, emotion and thoughts. The human brain is well protected by the skull. Inside the skull, the brain is covered by cranial meninges consisting of an outer layer of the dura mater, a very thin middle layer called arachnoid, and an outer layer which is in contact with the brain tissue called pia mater. The brain can be divided into three major parts: first forebrain, second midbrain and third hindbrain. Figure 21.4 diagrammatic showing the sagittal section of the human brain. 21.4.1 Forebrain. The forebrain consists of cerebellum, thalamus and hypothalamus. Figure 21.4 Cerebrum forms the major part of the human brain. A deep cleft divides the cerebrum longitudinally into two halves, which are termed as the left and right cerebral hemisphere. The hemispheres are connected by a tract of nerves fiber called corpus callosum. The layer of cell which covers the cerebral hemisphere is called cerebral cortex and is thrown into prominent fold. The cerebral cortex is referred to as the gray thrown into prominent folds. Gray matter due to its grayish appearance. The neuron cell bodies are concentrated here, giving the color. The cerebral cortex contains motor areas, sensory areas, and large regions that are neither clearly sensor nor motor in function. These regions, called as the association areas, are responsible for complex function like intersensory association, memory, and communication. Fiber of the tracts are covered with the myelin sheath which constitute the inner part of the cerebral hemisphere. They give an opaque white appearance on the layer and hence is called the white matter. The cerebrum wraps around a structure called thalamus, which is a major coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. Another very important of the brain called hypothalamus lies at the base of the thalamus. The hypothalamus contains a large number of centers which control body temperature, urge for eating and drinking. It also contains several groups of neurosecretory cells which secrete hormones called hypothalamic hormones. The inner part of the cerebral hemisphere and a group of associated deep structure like amygdala, hippocampus called form a complex structure called the limbic lobe or limbic system. Along with the hypothalamus, it is involved in the regulation of sexual behavior, expression of emotion, reaction, example excitement, pleasure, rage and fear, and motivation. 21.4.2 Midbrain. The midbrain is located between the thalamus or hypothalamus of the forebrain and pons of the hindbrain. A canal called the cerebral aqueduct passes through the midbrain. The dorsal portion of the midbrain consists mainly of four round swelling lobes called corpora quadrigemina. 21.4.3 Hindbrain. The hindbrain comprises pons, cerebellum, and medulla. Also connected the medulla oblongata. Pons constitute a fiber tract that interconnected different regions of the brain. Cerebellum has very convoluted surface in order to provide the additional space for many more neurons. The medulla of the brain is connected to the spinal cord. The medulla contains center which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretion. The three major regions make up the brain stem: midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. Brain stem forms the connection between the brain and spinal cord. 1.5 Reflex action and reflex arc. You must have experienced a sudden withdrawal of a body part which comes in contact with subjects that are extremely hot, cold, pointed, or animal is that are scary or poisonous. The entire process of response to a peripheral nervous stimulation that occur involuntarily without conscious effort or thought and require the involvement of a part of the central nervous system is called a reflex action. The reflex pathway comprises at least one afferent neuron receptor and one efferent effector or exciter neuron appropriately arranged in a series. Figure 21.5. The afferent neuron receives signal from a sensory organ and transmits the impulse via a dorsal nerve route into the CNS. At the level of spinal cord, the efferent neuron then carries signal from CNS to the effector. The stimulus and response thus form a reflex arc as shown below in the knee jerk reflex. You should carefully study figure 21.5 to understand the mechanism of knee jerk reflex. Figure 21.5 Diagrammatic representation of reflex action showing knee jerk reflex. 21.6 Sensory reception and processing. Have you ever thought, how do you feel the climatic changes in the environment? How do you see an object and its color? How do you hear a sound? The sensory organ detect all types of changes in the environment and send appropriate signal to the CNS, where all the impulse inputs are processed and analyzed. Signals are then sent to different parts or center of the brain. This is how you can sense changes in the environment. Sense organ. We smell things by our nose, taste by tongue, hear by ears, and see object by eyes. The nose contains muscle-coated receptors which are specialized for receiving the sense of smell and are called olfactory receptors. These are made up of olfactory epithelium that consists of three kinds of cells. The neuron of the olfactory epithelium extend from the outside environment directly into a pair of broad bean-sized organs called olfactory bulb, which are extension of the brain's limbic system. Both nose and tongue detect dissolved chemicals. A chemical sense of gustation, taste, and olfactory smell are functionally similar and interrelated. The tongue detects taste through taste bud containing gustatory receptors. With each taste of food or sip of drink, the brain integrates the differential input from the taste bud and complex flavor is perceived. In the following section, you will be introduced to the structure and functioning of the eye sensory organ for vision and the ear sensory organ for hearing. 21.6.1 Eye. Our paired eye are located in the socket of the skull called orbits. A brief account of structure and function of the human eye is given in the following section. 21.6.1.1 Parts of an eye. The adult human eyeball is nearly a spherical structure. The wall of the eyeball is composed of three layers. Figure 21.6. The external layer is composed of a dense connective tissue and is called the sclera. The anterior portion of this layer is called the cornea. The middle layer, choroid, contain many blood vessels and look bluish in color. The choroid layer is thin over the posterior two-thirds of the eyeball, but it becomes thick in the anterior part to form the ciliary body. The ciliary body itself continue forward to form a pigment and opaque structure called the iris, which is the visible colored portion of the eye. The eyeball contains a transparent crystalline lens which is held in place by ligaments attached to the ciliary body. In front of the lens, the aperture surrounded by the iris is called the pupil. The diameter of the pupil is regulated by the muscle fiber of iris. The inner layer is the retina, and it contains three layers of neural cells from inside to outside: ganglion cells, bipolar cells, and photoreceptor cells. There are two types of photoreceptor cells, namely rods and cones. These cells contain the light sensitive proteins called the photopigments. The daylight photopic vision and color vision are function of cones, and the twirling scotopic vision is the function of the rods. The rods contain a purplish red protein called the rhodopsin or visual purple, which contain a derivative of vitamin A. In the human eye, there are three types of cones which possesses their own characteristic photopigment that respond to red, green, and blue light. The sensation of different colors are produced by various combinations of these cones and their photopigment. When these cones are stimulated equally, a sensation of white light is produced. The optic nerve leaves the eye, and retinal blood vessel enter it at a point medial to and slightly above the posterior pore of the eyeball. Photoreceptor cells are not present in that region and hence is called the blind spot. At the posterior pole of the eye, lateral to the blind spot, there is the yellowish pigment spot called macula lutea with the central pit called the fovea. The fovea is a thin out portion of the retina where only the cones are densely packed. It is the point where the visual acuity resolution is the greatest. The space between the cornea and the lens is called the aqueous chamber and contain a thin watery fluid called aqueous humor. The space between the lens and the retina called the vitreous chamber and is filled with the transparent gel called the vitreous humor. 21.6.1.2 Mechanism of vision. The light ray is visible wavelength focused on the retina through the cornea and lens generate potential impulse in rods and cones. As mentioned earlier, the photosensitive compound photopigment in the human eye is composed of opsin, a protein, and retinal and aldehyde of vitamin A. Light induced dissociation of the retinal from opsin resulting in changes in the structure of opsin. This causes membrane permeability changes. As a result, potential differences are generated in the photoreceptor cells that produce a signal that generates action potential in the ganglion cell through the bipolar cells. These action potential impulses are transmitted by the optic nerves to the visual swollen and is called ampulla, which contain a projecting ridge called crista ampullaris, which has hair cells. The saccule and utricle contain a projecting ridge called macula. The crista and macula are the specific receptor of the vestibular apertures responsible for maintenance of balance of the body and posture. 20.6.2.1 Mechanism of hearing. How does ear convert sound waves into neural impulse, which are sensed and processed by the brain, enabling us to recognize a sound? The external ear receives sound waves which indirects them to the eardrum. The eardrum vibrates in response to the sound waves, and these vibrations are transmitted through the ear ossicles, malleus, incus, and stapes to the oval window. The vibrations are passed through the oval window to the fluid of the cochlea, where they generate waves in the lymph. The waves in the lymph induce a ripple in the basilar membrane. The movement of the basilar membrane bends to the hair cells, pressing them against the tectorial membrane. As a result, nerve impulses are generated in the associated afferent neurons. These impulses are transmitted in the afferent fibers via auditory nerves to the auditory cortex of the brain, where the impulses are analyzed and the sound is recognized. Summary. The neural system coordinates and integrates function as well as the metabolic and homeostatic activities of all organs. Neuron, the functional unit of neural system, are excitable cells due to the differential concentration gradient of iron across the membrane. The electrical potential difference across the resulting neural membrane is called the resulting potential. The nerve impulse is conducted along the axon membrane in the form of wave of depolarization of the repolarization. A synapse formed by the membranes of a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron, which may or may not be separated by a gap called synaptic cleft. Chemicals involved in the transmission of impulse at chemical synapse called the neurotransmitters. Human neural system consists of two parts: central neural system (CNS) and the peripheral neural system (PNS). The CNS consists of the brain and spinal cord. The brain can be divided into three major parts: forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. The forebrain consists of cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. The cerebrum is longitudinally divided into two halves that are connected by the corpus callosum. A very important part of the forebrain called hypothalamus control the body temperature, eating, drinking, inner parts of cerebral hemisphere, and a group of associated deep structure form a complex structure called limbic system, which is concerned with olfactory autonomic response, regulation of sexual behavior, expression of emotional reaction, and motivation. The midbrain integrates visual, tactile, and auditory inputs. The hindbrain comprises pons, cerebellum, and medulla. The cerebellum integrates information received from the circular canals of the ear and the auditory system. The medulla contains center which control respiration, cardiovascular reflex, and gastric secretion. Pons consist of fiber tracts that interconnect different regions of the brain. The entire process of involuntary response to the peripheral nervous stimulations called reflex action. Information regarding changes in the environment is received by the CNS through the sensory organ, which are processed and analyzed. Signals are then sent for necessary adjustment. The wall of the human eyeball is composed of three layers. The external layer is composed of cornea and sclera. Inside sclera is the middle layer, which is called the choroid. Retina, the innermost layer, contains the two types of photoreceptor cells, namely rods and cones. The daylight photopic vision and color vision are called the function of cones and dwelling. Scotopic vision is the function of the rod. The light enters through cornea. The lens and the image of the objects are formed on the retina. The ear can be divided into the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. The middle ear contains three ossicles called malleus, incus, and stapes. The fluid-filled inner ear is called the labyrinth, and the coiled portion of the labyrinth is called cochlea. The organ of the corti is the structure which contains hair cells that acts as the auditory receptor and is located on the basilar membrane. The vibration produced in the eardrum are transmitted through the ear ossicle and oval window to the fluid-filled inner ear. Nerve impulses are generated and transmitted by the afferent fiber to the auditory cortex of the brain. The inner ear also contains a complex system located above the cochlea called vestibular apparatus. It is influenced by gravity and movement and helps us to maintaining balance of the body and posture.